we'll try this. Okay, last time we talked a little bit about ecosystems, and you guys had a chance to do your own food web. So let's see if we can combine some of that information back together. When we went out to the pond, what kind of things did we see? Lila?
Birds.
Okay, we have birds. What else? Daniel?
Algae.
Algae. Okay. Kaya?
Trees.
Trees. Dan?
Insects.
Insects. Snake.
Snapping turtles.
Snapping turtles. Jacob?
Rocks.
Rocks. Jason? Michael?
Nest.
Squirrels.
Nest.
Okay. So I'm going to separate a couple of these things because the overall that we're talking about, we're going to talk about an ecosystem. An ecosystem is a combination of things that are all kind of living and working together. And on top of that, so I'm going to take squirrels out of there. Not that there aren't squirrels, but we're going to stick to the pond for now. On top of that, we have one kind of outlier in all of these things that we say. Which one of these things doesn't really belong? Which one of these things doesn't really belong? It's not that it doesn't exist. It's different than everything else. Arel?
Rocks.
Rocks. What is different about rocks compared to everything else in the ecosystem? What is different about them? Victor?
It's not a living thing.
Okay, it's not a living thing. Okay, and in science, we have a fancy scientific word for living and non-living. So we have something that's biotic and abiotic. Okay, and biotic is a living thing. And abiotic is a non-living. So when I say this is not wrong, it's not. There are rocks in the ecosystem, and they're important parts of the ecosystem. For instance, a fish might hide behind the rock. Okay, keep away from predators. Okay, an animal might, lay behind the rock to sleep because it's protected. So all of those things are part of what it is that you're doing. Okay, but they are related in different ways. Okay, now let's think about an order or the way things work inside of the ecosystem, and we'll go back to the food chains that you created. Where do all these things start, or what's the beginning of all food chains? Thomas?
Plants.
Plants, okay, so even before plants, because plants need what in order to live and to grow? What do they need?
Water.
Water,
Sun.
sun. Okay, so what's the beginning of all forms of life? Where did we get our energy from? Yep, not from water.
Sun.
It's from the sun. Okay, so the very beginning of all ecosystems, we're going to start out with the sun. Okay, and then what does the sun give us?
Light and warmth.
Light, warmth, and that's transferred through different processes in our body into same reason you eat food. Yep,
Energy.
energy. Okay, so we have energy and it exists, and there's a process in plants called photosynthesis, and it's happening in behind. You can't really see it, but we know that when you combine water and sunlight and you get green plants, it's a process called photosynthesis. What happens when the little rabbit, we don't have a rabbit here, let's put a rabbit up, comes into the ecosystem? Okay, and maybe we'll have some grass. Okay, so we're going to start with this, and we have the sun. Okay, and the sun is giving its energy to the grass, and the grass grows, and then the rabbit comes along, okay, and the rabbit eats the grass. So Ira just said, well, we get energy from food. So where's the rabbit getting its energy from? From the grass. Okay, so the rabbit's going to consume some grass, and it's going to get some energy. Okay, and then does it stop there?
No.
What would be a next step? Yep.
The rabbit gets eaten.
Okay, maybe the rabbit gets eaten. Do you think of something that might eat a rabbit?
Coyotes.
A coyote. Okay.
A bird.
Let's see. Let's read.
A bird.
Okay, so we have a coyote. Okay, and then the energy from the rabbit is then transferred to the coyote. Okay, is there something that might eat a coyote?
No. A bear.
A bear, potentially. We're talking about a pond. This ecosystem could exist just out here. Okay, what happens if the coyote, it gets old and it dies? What happens to that coyote? Oh,
Algae may go.
no, not necessarily algae, but yeah, you're on the right track. Jason?
Some other animal comes and it's just that.
Okay, so some other animal comes and it's getting its energy from, even though the coyote is no longer living, okay, it's getting its energy from that coyote. So a bird, a carrion, like a vulture, a turkey vulture might come along and it would feed on that. Okay, scavengers, the snapping turtle we talk about is definitely a scavenger. Okay, it eats dead things, loves dead things. Okay, so it's getting its energy for that. So energy starting from the sun gets passed along into the grass and then into the rabbit and into the coyote dies and it comes back through the system. Nope, that would be more than a straight line. Yeah,
Food chain.
yeah, it's called a food chain. Okay, because there's links and everything is passed from one to the other to the other. Now, is it possible that there are insects, feeding on the grass, and the birds are feeding on the insects, and all of these things are happening together? So instead of a chain, we start to have different relationships. What do we call that? What did you just say?
A cycle.
A cycle? No.
A web.
A web. So we call that a food web. So we have food chains, and they're more in a straight line, and we have a food web. Okay, and the reason that these things are important is because it explains how energy is passed from one system to another. Okay, within nature, this is how it happens. This is how everything interacts with each other. Okay, there's big scientific words for these things. Did you come across them when you were making your food chain? The sun is considered, and then it gives energy to the grass, and the grass is considered to be a producer. Okay? And then the rabbit comes along and eats the grass, and it's considered to be a consumer. Okay, and we can have different levels of consumers. Okay, the rabbit would be one level, a coyote would be a higher level consumer. And the coyote dies, and it starts to rot, and the snapping turtle comes along, and it kind of cleans up the mess and puts everything back into the system. What do we call that? It's also sometimes called a scavenger, but there's a scientific term that we're going to use. Close. It's called a decomposer. So we have producers, consumers, and decomposers. Okay, and all of these different things can be labeled with those things. All right? So we have quite a few scientific terms that we've talked about already this morning. We have biotic, abiotic. Okay, we have food chains, food webs, and the difference between the two. Producers, consumers, and decomposers are examples of that. Okay?